Amazing. Hello. Hi, I am Sophia, and I'm a contributor for Hypercerts, and I'm really excited to be here today and talk about how Hypercerts and its role in revolutionizing impact funding systems. Um, that is just a high level way of saying how do we fund stuff, especially how do we fund things that are impactful and are harder to fund in our normal in the normal ways we fund stuff. So really where this can be really useful is when it comes to public goods funding. And so public goods funding are things that aren't funded uh, by typical markets or don't have these like, similar business models, but create a lot of value for people and create a lot of impact. And Hypercerts creates a new protocol, a new primitive that makes some of these funding systems really possible. And I'll go into a little bit about what a hypercert is, um, and want to preface it all with saying um, it's a lot of the actual funding systems around it is a bit more theoretical and will continue to get felt out and understood as the ecosystem continues to grow. But Hypercerts itself is something really cool that we can start implementing and has a lot of impactful stuff for the world. So I'll get into it. Enough about me rambling. Um, this part in bold, I said, Hypersearch is an open data layer for tracking and rewarding positive impact. You can actually say a hypercert is a protocol for tracking and rewarding positive impact. A hypercert is an ERC 1155. A hypercert is a new primitive. There's a few different ways that I could actually say this, and it hasn't been fully decided on what's the main one. I change it up depending on the audience. But the way that you can think about a hypercert is is similar. I know for this unconference, people are talking about creating a hypercert, almost proving like as a co-op of like, oh, we're here, and what that means. What that means is like as people have these hypercerts, you start to have these instead of proof of attendance, proof of impact um, protocols all across the blockchain space, and those later on can be used for tracking and rewarding impact. Um, and I'll talk about how they're being used to do that later on. But uh, this is one of the like things I like saying an open data layer since it starts getting people excited. But there's a lot more to what hypercerts can be. Okay, so a hypercert. This is the one individual. Hello, welcome. One individual hypercert represents a unique claim people care about and wish to fund. So if we look under the hood of what one specific hypercert is or what it literally is, it's similar to an NFT that contains information about like what the impact was, some tags, so like the date that the impact occurred, some that were scope. So it just stores this data about impact. And that's why I said earlier how storing that data creates a data layer about impact across the blockchain. Uh, Hypersphere, get it? Hypercert. Um, so one of them just represents a unique impact claim. Sweet. Okay, so a little bit about why hypercerts exist. Why are they important? Um, Backing up for anyone who just came and just joined and starting off, one of the really big reasons that hypercerts is around and why it's really important is because funding impact is hard. Um, right now, in the current ways that we fund things, what we value does not always equal what is profitable. And this is what makes impact systems funding impact very difficult to do when these two things don't link up. Um, here's a little example of where of things that have a lot of profit, like total shareholder return, things that create a lot of profit, like AI capabilities, energy from oil and gas, and energy from renewables. These things create a lot of profit. But what are things that are really valuable? Maybe having less CO2 in the atmosphere, AI safety, biodiversity, open source software, community building. This is one that I think we can all really understand and personally feel while we're here. But these things, even though they create so much value, especially like we feel it, we're part of these communities, we can really tell this completely transformed and the value that was felt. They're not profitable. It's really hard to get people to pay for communities. Trying to create a profit on top of communities creates just weird social dynamics and just changes the feel of a community. It's really hard making these things that create a lot of value into businesses. Um, and so in this specific area, how does funding right now flow into things that create a lot of value but aren't that profitable? Right now, it's typically a lot of grants, bounties, prospective funding. For I don't know how this conference is funded, but oftentimes for community building, it can be like sponsorships for a conference, which is great for a conference. But when it's maybe more like community building and relationships forming, sponsors maybe that's not as incentive. There's not as many incentives for sponsors to pay for things like that. And like or less CO2, you have nonprofits or open source software. But again, these are just really finicky way of funding. Grants, bounties, prospective fundings, they're inefficient, they're risk adverse. Um, and the other piece is they're really fragmented. And this is a huge problem, especially because I know, let's go back to the community or sponsorship example. A lot of people are asking for um, there's not a streamlined way of how to get this funding. And so a lot of people are going to people asking for funding. And then the funders, there's not a streamlined way of like, how do I make sure that you do well with this funding and that this funding leads to impact? You see this a lot in funding climate solutions spaces where there's a lot of desire and energy and that people really care about when it comes to climate impact. But it's really fragmented. How do we ensure that these carbon credits that Luis says are valid, or the United States says is valid, are actually valid in another country when you don't? Who issues these and uh, who validates them? When we continue being in this really fragmented ecosystem, it's just it makes it really harder to fund some of these things that we all agree are important, like having less CO2 in the air. And a carbon credit is a really great example of what this some of the issues of having fragmentization without having, yeah, some of the issues around that. Um, so back when I was saying earlier about how hypercerts can be an open this data layer for tracking and rewarding impact, this is what I mean. I started with that slide and just kind of threw you in without really explaining what that looked like. But what that means is a hypercert, since it stores this information and data about a specific impact claim, it can start serving as a single open shared decentralized database that enables impact funding mechanisms to be on top and built on top of hypercerts. So let's think of this basic data layer. Say hypercerts has a bunch of data about carbon credits, about how carbon was sequestered from the atmosphere. Instead of it being uh, the United States has a few stored on Amazon and others, and then the evaluators, you can't tell who's evaluating, and there's no incentives for evaluators to evaluate, and it's all kind of spread across the sphere. What if we had one data layer that everyone could see? It's on the blockchain, it's fully transparent. We know what it is, anyone can access, it's fully transparent. So that's what it is. This and on top of that, it's not just a data layer. There's a schema for how a hypercert data is structured with like their name, description, work scope, impact scope, and all of that. And I can get into more of that later. So it's all that shared schema, which means when we're trying to search this data layer, when I'm trying to see what's on this data layer, way easier to do since you're just indexing the schema rather than a bunch of NFTs that people said people have, and that again are fragmentized, fractionalized. I can't say that word across how we decide to write up this impact. So what this means, you can have hypercerts. You can also add additional layers like EAS, Ethereum Attestation Services. That would be a great additional layer. So you add like it's like an evaluation, an attestation. Like, hey, I say I made a hypercert for myself for the impact I created at this conference, and I made a hypercert. It means it doesn't mean much on its own, but say now the conference owner or whoever gives an attestation being like, yep, this was really impactful. Or Luis and Jen, you guys go, yep, this was really impactful. Now my hypercert has a bit more value because it's receiving these other additional data layers and like evaluations, measurements, all that. Okay, and now we have um, just I'll go into the funding mechanisms for how these things happen. Say you can have Optimism's retroactive funding, or you have Gitcoin grants, or you have maybe bounties that are done. um, they make those decisions on, say let's do the simple decision route. So you have a holder that makes those decisions and go, okay, we're going to decide how do we give out this money. They now look at, oh, let's look at the measurements, let's look at the evaluations, let's look at the attestations that a hypercert has to decide how we should allocate the money. And that's a little bit of how some of these things could work. And then you got the people that get funded and now funding all of that. So here's a high level of just where it all places in the data stack and what this can mean for the future. All right. So getting into some of the technical details of a hypercert. A hypercert itself is an ERC 1155 semi-fungible token. It's another fancy way of saying, not an NFT, not a ERC 721, not an ERC whatever 20, not just a token. It's like a little mix of between where it's semi-fungible. So it could be an NFT, but you can also fractionalize it, and those fractions and those pieces are essentially like tokens if you think about it. These are for people who are really technical and want to understand what's happening under the hood. But the ownership of a hypercert can be fractionalized. And what this enables is a whole cool set of things. Let's see if I talk about that. Oh, I'll go into that in a bit. But you have who did the impact, what they did, when they did it. Um, and yeah, and so when you have, I'll go back here. Because it's a fractionalized, you can have a whole like web of owners of hypercerts, and that can later be used for things like retroactive funding or maybe impact investing. Say you were an owner of this conference's hypercert, and then later on optimism because you sponsored or something, and then later on optimism or some retroactive public goods funder goes, yep, this was super impactful. This conference made a huge impact for the ecosystem. Let me give back, I don't know, $10,000. And then you can have it set so that the money trickles down to all of the owners of a hypercert, theoretically, or things like that. So then that creates a new kind of system where it's like, oh, I want a piece of this hypercert because not only am I supporting impact I love, there's also a chance I can get retroactively rewarded, which is exciting too. So here's how this originally originated about a year and a half ago. This all came from Protocol Labs and at Funding the Commons, where this guy named David Dowd had created this white paper and essentially talked about feedback loops for funding public goods. And their view is that a certificate or certs closes the impact signal flow loop. A little bit of what that looks like is you have like funding, you have impact, you can see that, and then you have um, say the money that arises from that, and then it creates this flow loop for impact investors, where now if you know that some type of some type of activity will create a lot of impact in the future, how you can fund that early and after it gets a lot of impact, continue to close the loop and um, and receive funding from that. So yeah, so here's a little bit of what that could look like. Okay, so a little bit, this is more because I made this presentation for some updates for the Hypercert at the PL Summit. So here's some other stuff about what's been exciting, but with Hypercert so far, and that I'll get into. But this was ran with Gitcoin. So if I don't know here if people are familiar with Gitcoin, but essentially, they're a grants platform where people can sign up, apply for grants, and then receive grants. And now there's a pilot where anyone who ran a grants round or if you created a project on Gitcoin Grant Stack, you were able to mint a hypercert for the impact that you created. We tested this out with Zuzulu. We tested this out with Funding the Commons. And we also have Hyperboards pilot, and I'll show a little bit of all that looks like. Hello, welcome. So here's an example of what a hyper board looks like. This is just a collection of hypercerts with their ownership. Remember how earlier ownership can be fractionalized? Their ownership represented on a big digital billboard. Um, okay, so this is what the hypercerts ecosystem looks like. So the hypercerts protocol is exactly what I was just saying before. It's just this data layer. It's this ERC 1155 token. It's this way of tracking and rewarding positive impact or impact anything, whatever it is. And it's just a protocol similar to how any other protocol or contract happens on in blockchain. But on top of that, you can add tools to interact with hypercerts, to mint it, to build it, to create stuff. You can add applications of hypercerts, which is like Hyperboard. You can integrate it with stuff like Gitcoin, how we like integrate it into their grants round. And then ultimately, the goal is for people to use the protocol, build tools, applications, integrations, so that it creates an impact funding system for their own use case. So the idea is people will have different understandings and use cases for what a good impact funding systems looks for them, and this creates the Lego blocks that allows people to begin putting these Lego blocks together to create impact funding systems for their own use cases. Here's my big like why this is important, big picture. But right now, when we want to get things funded, for the majority of public goods funding, it's slow, inefficient, top down bureaucracies. Things like roads and parks, like they're great. Everyone agrees they add a lot of value, but to actually get funding for them, get them created, it's a slow, inefficient, top down process. At least that's how it is in America, where I'm from. Um, and one of the really cool principles of blockchain, and the whole reason I'm super involved in this space in general, is I truly believe that these Lego blocks and these tools have the ability to create fast moving, interconnected funding networks. So, how we as people can come down and decide what we want to fund. And if we think about why we've had slow, inefficient top down bureaucracies, it really came down to um, trusting governments or trusting or creating these systems so money gets allocated correctly. I think the goal behind it was um, I don't know whether this actually happens, but just ensuring money gets spent in the best way possible and that there's not like bad players that just take it all from themselves. I know that happens in certain places, but I think the role of why these systems exist in general was in the hopes that um, that it goes down to good things. And you create all these inefficient bureaucracy levels because you have to go through systems that were designed to make sure people spend money correctly. That's really why we've created these systems. And we've had centuries and centuries of creating that. And I'm not saying these are really bad. I'm just saying they're slow. And now we have technology where we can program into money or program on the blockchain rules for how money gets allocated. That's already happening. We can program rules for allocation strategies or rules about money. That's what Solidity is. Solidity is literally programming rules about contract addresses and what that means. And you can do that to ensure that bad players get punished for doing bad things with money or good players get rewarded for doing good things. And you can now do that from this with technology. And when you can do that with technology, it enables the ability for us to come together to decide, okay, we've agreed with rules, code is law for how money can get spent. How do we now fund what matters to us? How do we start funding these public goods? How do we start funding areas that create a lot of value? Um, so this is my little pitch. Not more to people, but people to who fund. Like we should start explore and experiment with new funding mechanisms. I really am trying to urge like sponsors. Say you're sponsoring $100,000 into some event. Maybe put 5,000 or 10,000 into testing out these novel funding mechanisms and funding ideas, or a venture capitalist, put a little bit of funding into these experimentations to see to explore what it could do. Um, and so yes, again, like big picture, thanks to everyone who made this happen. Hypercerts is a big accumulation spun out of Protocol Labs with support from Funding the Commons, Network Goods, and all these other people. Here's some contact information if you want to reach out. But those are all the slides I had prepared. And now we can just like open it up and just start talking about like what what this means and cool stuff. So yeah, just wanted to open up the floor, questions, thoughts, feedbacks. What came on your mind when you heard of this, and what brought you here, and what made you excited to, yeah, all that.
From my side, thanks a lot for the presentation, Sophia.
Woohoo.
Um, I've already seen a little bit about hypercerts and already have like some, yeah, kind of like directions, maybe slightly like more advanced questions for a bit later. So maybe not sure if yeah, and Inez, you already got to see a little bit of hypercerts before, if they're already like familiar and everything. But yeah, I'll just leave the room open for some questions, and then I can add mine afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. And then, yeah, not to put anyone on the spot, but Jen, super curious what excited you or um, what brought you
Yeah,
here.
um, I was gonna wait till somebody else wants to speak because I actually have a couple of points written down that I wanted to wanted to go over. Um, but I'm happy to dive into it.
Yeah.
So I've been following the idea of hypercerts. I think till ever since who did I think I first heard Ali Borda talk
Hmm.
about it at some ETH conference, and I'm all for it. I'm super excited about it. I'm here because I kind of want to see where are things, how is everything going, who is using it for what. Um,
Hmm.
because I'm like I said, I'm highly interested in it. I am involved with a couple of regenerative projects across different blockchains where, like you said, the CO2 and this is where people are proposing this can have an impact. Um,
Hmm.
so forgive me, but I am going to try and put some sand in the gears or try to poke some holes in the end
Please
because
do. Yes,
so the
I love that.
so for example, let's start what something you said last was if you have a conference and you can put aside a little bit of money, why we need to knock on a lot of doors to get people to pay attention and say, hey, are you at least willing to try this out and make some experience. So I went to a bank that where I'm a customer, which is a
Mhm,
so-called local green bank, and they put at the end of the year they put a certain amount of revenue that they make into sponsoring green projects, whatever it is,
mhm,
right? And
Yeah.
I've been trying. I've said, look, it's not going to cost you anything. I'll do this all for you. All I need is basically that you take $10,000 from your big pool and are willing to do this. But this is all so unbelievably hard. We have to knock on probably thousands of doors.
Yep.
From this bank, I have not received a reply, and so I'm trying to paint a picture of what I'm doing, what I think is necessary to do. But even if you get somebody, let's
Hmm.
say we get somebody that says, "All right, tell me more," you
Now what?
immediately run into the a barrier to entry problem of having to use crypto for this.
Hmm.
So this is basically maybe let's start there. This is my first question. What's your experience in AA? Have you had anybody actually say, "Oh, this sounds from the normal world, not from crypto"?
Yep.
Say, um, "This sounds very interesting. I'm excited. I'm technology forward." Um, to then run into the next problem, which is like my bank that has 10,000 customers. Now, I would be going to the bank and say, I need to set up custodial wallet infrastructure for all of your customers so that they can participate even in the Gitcoin voting mechanism, right?
Hmm.
I'm curious, how far have you gone or come to then also maybe confirm, or maybe give me hope, and say, oh, this can be overcome um, in different ways. But this is typically one of the first things that I run into are just simple technical problems that whoever you're proposing this to can be in favor and say, this sounds so interesting. If you're telling them your customers now have to own a crypto key to participate, the conversation usually shuts down.
Yep. 100%. Totally agree.
Okay.
So I think on that note, I think this is a little bit to do with I'm a product person, and so I think this has to do with issues with dApps in general, so decentralized applications. And well, I and what I think is Hypersearch has a unique opportunity where non-crypto people, especially Luis and I felt this really when we were at TDF. It was a lot of people who weren't into the whole crypto sphere, but were really interested in regeneration or permaculture or creating things that add a lot of
Mm,
value but don't create a lot of profit. And so it's like, oh, this is really exciting that there's these new systems that maybe could do that. And what I found is you're right, the barrier of entry is awful, and it's a mix of and this is something that I personally want to fix in the world and just dApps in general and decentralized products in general. And it's this weird mix of weighing how much needs to be decentralized versus centralized. And so when we think about why these whole systems are decentralized and why we use protocols instead of just having this on an Excel spreadsheet that the UN agrees and publishes on a website, you could just do that. That theoretically is the same thing. Is is because ultimately the whole um, this is getting really, really technical, but the problem that the blockchain solves is how do we coordinate when we can't trust each other? That's really the value add that a blockchain solves. And so, really, why we go through all this pain of making decentralized applications and putting everything on some decentralized database and making a thing at the cost of it being insanely a shitty product, pardon my French, is because the system is good when we can't trust each other. And we often can't trust each other when it comes to things like money allocation, when we're deciding how should money be allocated. A lot of people don't trust the government that they're spending the money correctly. A lot of people have corrupt governments that they can't trust. A lot of people don't want to donate to nonprofits because they don't trust that the nonprofits are spending money in good ways. And so that's where in those specific cases, um, it can be valuable. And so now going backwards of like, is there hope at making where do we make the trade-offs to make the product better? I think where it is right now, we have a long way to go in terms of just small things of no one interacts on the Ethereum, even if you have a wallet in Ethereum blockchain. No one really makes dApps nowadays that they're built right aren't on Ethereum. That's
Hmm.
going to be so expensive to do any transactions. You're probably using some layer two, like Optimism. Um, but we haven't agreed on which layer twos we're going to use. And you can use a bunch of different ones. So now you have to, if you have all your assets on one, you have to bridge across and you do things. And then now you have all this stuff and then you like it just creates all of these everything on Ethereum is a modular blockchain, which is technically like how it's built,
Hmm.
like and makes it just an awful product experience. There's a lot of people that are working on these problems. I'm personally working on them within Optimism. There's a layer two called the super chain, which is a bunch of individual ones like Coinbase, and the one I'm working on is called Public Goods Network, and others. And we're essentially together trying to identify what are things like if you have all your money on Coinbase, how you can still use certain networks and stuff using your Coinbase wallet and all these things. So there's a lot of movement and progress happening towards solving these issues.
Okay.
But where it stands right now, I do think it's early to get people that are already hesitant about crypto to start using crypto products because they do suck. They fully suck. Um, and so it's easier to get people that are already in the crypto sphere, like Gitcoin grants, people who are making crypto projects who get the stuff to use these tools um, right now. But who knows? I want to see a world where these products get really good and solve funding issues for the world at large, not just our own little insular circles.
Yeah.
And I'm a bigger belief if we should go completely backwards and start with these people. Like if we want to get the bank people, what what do they care about? And they have certain systems that they trust. They trust that all their bank people will pay their money back. So and that's a centralized system that they agree with. So then we don't have to make that on its own protocol. You know,
Hmm.
like start with that and then only make the pieces that on the blockchain that have to be on the blockchain. I think that's how all dApps should be designed. Um, but that's just not we're in an insular circle of just building cool tech that only people who understand the tech can use it. And
Yeah.
we're never gonna reach real
In,
large scale at that in that way.
so you're probably fully aware, but to me, this is undersold news. Is the fact that the American Cancer Society did a round on Gitcoin.
Yes.
I fell off my chair because that is really the first real big player and respected and a
Hmm.
respected entity like that. I use that now to go to people and say, look, the American Cancer Society is doing it, maybe you should look at this, right? This is huge. So what I like about what I'm going to say we the crypto people are doing with Hypercerts, but it's people like you who are driving it, right? um, is that is this sometimes naive but nevertheless valid approach to say open up the whole thing, right? Because the, the the first thing that you have the voluntary carbon market where everything is so regulated and you still have people lying, but it's reputation because
Hmm.
something, a CO2 token or a certificate coming out of a respected registry is usable because it came out of that registry. Here,
Hmm.
Hypercerts were saying, you know what? Let's see what happens. Anybody can make certificates, anybody can make claims. And so there are going to be, we accept the fact that there are probably going to be people making complete shit claims and worthless claims. And
Yep.
but that's why I like the crypto scene so much, is because we say, well, we don't care, right? Because we need to do all of this, and over time it will get better. So that's um I agree with you. Where we are, we have so much work to do. um
Hmm.
I want to go back to one more item that I just started talking about, which is the reputation, because a hypercert is only, just like anything else that is signed, is
Yep.
only worth as much as you value who printed it, right, or
Exactly.
who vouched for it. So we're going in a lot of use cases for dApps, going always ending up, and this has been since forever, always end up at an identity layer because I
Mhm.
need to know that this hypercert was signed by Greenpeace. And how do I know that? Well, Greenpeace at some point has to have their identity actually verified, and so we know that this address belongs to Greenpeace. They're still a holder, and so on, right?
Mhm.
So along that arc here of connecting things, right? You're technically reaching now a similar technology to, or let's say a larger framework of technology, which is the decentralized identifiers, um,
Mhm.
which have verifiable credentials as a standardized, and this is W3C stuff, right? So it's highly um, it, normal businesses are looking at this technology where you could, I mean, the, it's related to blockchains because a lot of the decentralized identifier infrastructure anchors into blockchains.
Mhm.
um, but you could issue a hypercert on as a verifiable credential. It has a cryptographic signature, it has an issuer, it has arbitrary data structures attached to it. I mean, I like the fact that hypercerts are standardizing parts of it.
Yeah.
So direct question: technologically, where do you see, or is really just all of this part of experimentation, because you do have that other technology that is blockchain related, but needs cryptographic infrastructure to sign things. Um, but it's adjacent, right? The whole decentralized identifier stuff. But you could do a hypersert on that too, and it would work the exact same way. Um, was there historically a reason why it ended up as an NFT or 1155 in the end?
Yeah. I think the reason really is because one of the goals is to create a marketplace for buying and selling impact claims. And you can also buy fractions of these impact claims. Like, again, I think some of these things aren't fully. This is me saying I'm not backing hypersearch since I don't fully. But in theory, because it's an 1155, instead of launching your own token to like bootstrap your project, you could create a
Yeah.
hypercert, and that is in itself a token. Has tokens that you can do sales of that can grow in prices and decrease in prices. That's me saying that. We don't legally publish that and say that with our language. Uh, because but in
No
theory,
worries.
just from a technical perspective, that is something that can be done with how it is. So that
Yeah.
is one of the reasons that it's created that structure. But you're a really good point about like it's a permissionless. There's no rules about who can issue a hypercert or who can't. But
Hmm.
where but the but that does come down to like the issuer makes a hypercert more valuable or less valuable if we have data that the issuer is someone like Greenpeace or someone really valuable, right? Maybe Vitalik or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that, again, those things happen on the data layer above a hypercert. So you can have these data layers on top that end up being like, yep, like you have a Gitcoin passport that's connected to the issuer, and it says all these things of they're human. At least we can tell it's not a robot giving out these impact claims, or even one step further, where there's ones that you can connect your real identity to, and you connect it, and you be like, "Yep." A data layer on top shows that this is connected to
Hmm.
fractal ID and is a real person who has a Nobel Peace Prize or something, or ZK proofs. You could put that on top of things. But again, all these things happen on the data layer above a hypercert.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes just what you said around the tradability and the transferability, having it as an NFT has that all built in,
Yeah,
whereas a verifiable credential, you need to build it on top. It doesn't have that aspect, right?
exactly, exactly. But you could totally build verifiable credentials that point to hypercerts, right?
Yeah, you can combine them too, right? You can have the
Combine them.
on-chain representation and the sort of the off-chain layer. Cool. All right. Now this is yeah. I didn't come with an agenda. I just these
Good.
are questions I wrote down as you were talking, and that I wanted to follow up
Okay.
on and get your opinion. Um, yeah, I'm still in a waiting mode, to be honest.
Yeah.
To
No, I agree, and especially as like, as someone who's been in this space for a bit and been working in this space, it's like I'm so excited about what the potential is, right? And what the promises um is of new impact funding systems using blockchain. And then it comes down to, okay, when we actually try building them and getting them into people's hands, they're like, I have to make a wallet? Like, what? I don't trust my keys. It's like all these things that like aren't fully in my control, but are just huge barriers of entry that made me be like, oh my god, no one's gonna be able to use this stuff. Like, or are the benefits really that good that it's worth going through all these hurdles to use these products?
yeah.
And so it's a little bit like, which me for personally, I'm always hitting these like ebbs and flows of like, I'm so excited, this is the future, we're gonna transform, and then being like, oh my god, we have a mountain of things we have to get through before we get close. And then, oh my god, no, we're in the whole thing, blah blah blah. Okay. So it's this constant ebbs and flows. And I don't know what the answer is. I just think I'm a really big believer of we need to get aligned on what are the things we need to work on. And um like I think we're just so like we're too fragmentized, and we should just be like, look, things these are the things that are really important so we can get this into people's hands and people can use these
Mhm.
tools. um but yeah, waiting mode slash you can wait in action, and if you, especially if you know the use cases of like, hey, like banks could do this, but why can't they? Like, and then just start being like, I tried running this with I tried having my mom donate to American Cancer Society on Gitcoin. Here's what went wrong. She didn't have a wallet. She didn't understand how to make a wallet. She didn't trust blah 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 blah. That adds so much value to the ecosystem. And then people go, me too, me too. Actually, the main issue for me was
Mhm.
bridging. Then be like, we should put all our energy on bridging or hypercert. The main issue is I don't know if the hypercerts are coming from a good person. We should put all our energy onto building data layers for identity. Understanding, getting more people to just like publicly share these pain points and start like streamlining this feedback, how people are interacting, is going to really help our ecosystem identify what we need to focus on. Um, yeah.
Yay.
Cool. I have a couple of questions from my side. I love
Totally.
how every time I like hear and let's see things about it, I yeah end up having like
Oh,
different questions.
oh, that is so.
Um, kind of like what I see like on hypercerts. A person thinks the point of like having hypercerts created is getting kind of like there's already like some bigger adoption on that.
Hmm.
So there is the integration with Gitcoin, for instance. So like every time like someone like donates to Gitcoin, like they get a certain like percentage of the
Hmm.
hypercert of the project and so on. Um, but what I think is like really important for hypercerts to actually like have more sense already, like as it currently is to have already a set of active impact evaluators.
Hmm.
Um, and basically, I'm wondering like how, right away, like how it's working right now with impact
Hmm.
evaluators. So if there are any active groups that are like already, yeah, already have some methodologies, like maybe in some specific fields, like carbon credits or something like that. um, and yeah, and how the process of doing it and doing an impact claim on a hypersearch like works. And also then kind of maybe a related question, but maybe not. But I was just like really curious if it's possible to somehow uh, add a relation between hypersearch on chain. So for instance, let's take the example like of the planting action that we did, like that we did in the
Hmm.
refi week, that we had the hypersearch and everything. So let's say, okay, so we did the hypersearch for the planting action itself. But for instance, for the planting action to be able to happen, it needed the soil preparation, for instance. Um, how? I wonder if there's like already a way to interlink, for instance, different hypercerts, so that it can say, oh, maybe like maybe you don't really have so much of a tangible, like yeah, way to assess like the impact of preparing the soil for the planting action, but without the soil preparation, you wouldn't be able to have the planting action, and then the planting action allowed X
Yeah.
number of trees to be planted and to capture like X amount of like carbon throughout the field.
Yep. Those are amazing questions. To answer the first one, um, yeah, so this is something that this guy named John built, which is DRC, a decentralized view system. That's the only one I've seen right now that connects um, attestations to hypercerts, and so it creates that layer. And then system that they have for deciding who becomes an evaluator, and maybe they're experts in certain things. It's really case dependent when it comes to evaluators. You're going to have different evaluators for something like tree planting versus open source software, right? And so the way they have it is, I think whoever makes the collection gets to decide who the evaluators are, and you can evaluate, decide that based off of a bunch of different mechanisms. Like if you want to do it fully blockchain way, you have a decentralized governance voting thing. If you want to do a centralized way, I just say, hey, Luis, you're an expert at this stuff. You evaluate and make an attestation for it. And you do tie your reputation, because every time you make an attestation, it's tied to your wallet address. And then you can see, like you said, Jan, you can see who that wallet address belongs to and are they credible. Um, and we need more identity primitives. Yeah, this person is an expert in this area, and we can tell that fully from on-chain stuff. That will be huge when that gets unlocked. Second, second question about the collection stuff. That is a really good point, and because oftentimes impacts are not, I like it's not like planting. I mean, planting trees is a really tiny example, but like a conference is a great example. It's not like, hey, impact for the conference. It's really a collection of who did who did the marketing, who helped the blah blah, who's like recording and sending these things. It's a cater of all of these different little pieces of impact that created one large scale impact. And so that's where hyper boards come in, which is really it's just a collection of hypercerts. So um, you can say, yeah, like you said, soil can be its own hypercert, and then tree planting can be its own hypercert, and then you make a hyper board, which is a collection of these two hypercerts. My understanding right now, as it stands, the hyper board is more like the UI collection. I don't know whether a hyperboard actually gets minted on chain. There were some questions, and someone was exploring making a hyperboard into a 6551, which ends up being a wallet. So now like you can all together give money to the big wallet, and then the wallet of like the whole collection of hypercerts, and then together you can allocate that money, like as you would for any wallet. I don't know whether that's what actually ended up. The way hypercert boards is built right now is just a UI, but in general that's something that totally could be done. The hope is that hypercerts are merged and combined. They're not supposed to be standalone entities. So that's a great point, and that's something I should definitely add into the slide deck, because that's like one of the big pieces of it. What are your questions?
So amazing. Thank you.
Hey, cool. I know we have a few more minutes also, but if that's all, happy to end it early. Yeah, if no one else has any last comments. Yeah, if not, wanted to thank you guys. I'm gonna share my contact information. You're welcome on Twitter. I'm doesn't show. Oh yeah. So my Twitter is my name underscore. So Sophia do underscore is my Twitter. If you want to follow me, feel free to DM me. And then my Telegram is Sadofi. I just put that in the chat. But yeah, if anyone's watching this video later down the line and wants, I love chatting about this stuff. Like I could talk about this forever. I like voice recordings too. Like you're welcome to just send like Jen, literally if you get like thoughts and you want to like bounce it off someone, like send me a voice recording, or I don't care, Twitter DM me, or we can talk in public. That is one of the best things. Share in public, share learnings in public. you can be like, here's some write ups, blah, 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 inspired by Sophia, whatever, if you want. Give me some feedback. And I'll be like, thanks. I don't know. I'll engage with you or whatever you want. Big fan of building in public. I love talking about this stuff. I live and breathe this just
Thank you so
like
much. I
so.
really enjoy it. I think Jan
Yay!
also, and I'm more than sure that people that will check out this recording will love Hypercerts too. So thank you so much
Yay!
for providing us this amount of knowledge and
Of course.
the opportunity to meet you too.
Yes, I'm so glad that I got to meet you. Thank you again, Louise, for having me, and for introducing me to this community, and um, for letting me share. I always happy to speak on hypercerts in the future of impact funding systems in general. So, thank you again for having me on.
Yay,
Amazing.
thanks.
Yay!
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sophia, for having the session and all the support. Sorry for the short notice, like for
Oh,
planning and everything.
I love that.
And yeah, we are going to mine to hypersearch for the conference
Woo!
and then distribute to attendees. So that's gonna be pretty cool.
Should
Um,
should publish your
so yeah,
process in a tweet. Be like, we did a hypercert. Here's what I did, and then
yeah,
any pain points of like the allow list on IPFS was so confusing. Huge. Like tweet that. Like that's great.
that's a really good point.
In we have a Telegram group chat, and some people are like, "Hey, we minted hypercerts for this conference. Here's some feedback of like this sucked. This sucked. People were confused on this. People were confused on this," and just posting it publicly. I think that's how we all grow as an ecosystem. Um, so awesome. Good luck as you guys mint your hypercerts. I'm sure it's not going to be. It's still in a new process. So I'm sure you'll bump into some roadblockers on the way, but hopefully we can learn from them.
Perfect.
Amazing, cool.
Thank you.
Um, yeah,
Happy
thanks a
holidays,
lot, Sophia.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and happy holidays all.
Mm,
Bye.
Bye.
thank you. Happy holidays. Ciao. Ciao.